Today we are talking about the magic of the Fender Rhodes. Believe it or not, the guitar player wasn't always the coolest guy in the band. We're continuing our conversation on electric pianos, specifically with this beautiful 1973 Mark I Fender Rhodes Stage Piano.
Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in beautiful downtown San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, like our videos, leave us comments. We appreciate your support and we love to interact with you.
This is exciting.
This is very exciting. We've hinted at getting a Rhodes here for a very long time. When it showed up yesterday, I was super excited.
It's almost brand new. It's a great unit.
In gorgeous condition, very timely because both you and I recently had watched the Beatles Get Back documentary.
Yeah.
And I think we both agreed that one of our favorite scenes was when they unwrap a brand new Fender Rhodes. It was a Suitcase.
It was a Suitcase model.
It's just an incredible scene because it's 1969 and they're pulling it back and they're playing it and they're like, it doesn't play like the other one from a couple years ago. They're like joking about it.
Right.
Billy Preston is just, he's throwing down on it. And
it's really cool.
And it's just, and it's unique because right then is kind of, you see how impactful this instrument was, especially for me. I wasn't around then, but seeing how impactful it was on a band as big as the Beatles, and as you listen to music from the time period, you can see how impactful it was because it's on everything.
Well, everyone wanted a Rhodes at that time, and they were there was some availability issues, and then there was also, when they first came out, there was transport problems. Mm-hmm. So like in the UK, they were harder to get because they were actually made way out, I think, in Fullerton, California. Mm-hmm. And up until that time, there was a lot of use of alternative electric pianos. There was what was called the poor man's Rhodes, which was the Hohner version. And then I think Krumar and a few other UK manufacturers made pianos, but only Fender made the Rhodes piano. And the history is kind of neat. The history of this instrument actually starts with World War II. And Harold Rhodes was a music teacher before he was in World War II. Mm-hmm. And during the war, he started putting together, actually before the war, he had this music program on how to teach people to play piano that was driven based on melody and chords. It was a lot like the simple music lessons you get in elementary school with the recorder. It was based on identifying the scale and how it repeats and how notes of the same or similar fashion can make a chord. But it was mostly for melody. And the reason why it has its roots in World War II is all the injured soldiers had nothing to do. It was kind of like what we currently call a Wounded Warrior Project. Well, back then, during the war, all the ones that were severely injured were in hospital for a while. And so Harold Rhodes was working as a medic, and he actually came up with using tubes that were pretty common in airplanes at the time. He used parts of the tubes to make a little. First he made a scale, and then he made like a scale and a half, and it was like a 20 some odd note piano that he used to teach music to the wounded veterans. And that continued even after the war. The Army had a full-time conditioning program. If you were injured, that this is a thing that they would pay for a couple years after your discharge. In the 50s, he started making a piano that was centered in Hollywood, California, called the Pre-Piano. And they were made out of wood. I used to own one of these, and I collected it for a while, about 20 some odd years ago, and I sold it to a guy in Dallas. But anyway, it looked like a little mini Grand. It almost looked like a giant little kid's toy piano.
Was it branded Rhodes Pre-Piano?
That was called the Harold Rhodes Piano Company. I think it was called the Rhodes Piano Company, and that thing was called the Pre-Piano. And I'm pretty sure Buddy Holly used one of those on Every Day. When you hear that little Celeste glockenspiel up on the top, that's actually one of those pre-pianos.
Interesting.
And for a while, there was an actual Celeste that was made for the top octaves, and it sold dismally. That was in the 60s. But in '59, Harold Rhodes formed a partnership with Leo Fender. And his goal was to get a little bit beefier production behind his keyboards. But Leo Fender had a problem. He didn't like anything that sounded from here on up. So he said, why don't we just make a 27 or 30 note bass unit? And so they started making these bass units. And Ray Manzarek was very grateful for that, because he said if there was never a Fender Rhodes bass unit, the Doors would have never existed.
Yeah. No,
And so that was a pretty standard as a bass player talking. Not really a keyboard player. I mean, a keyboard player playing bass, but the idea with that instrument being invented made him be able to play other instruments and the bass the whole time. And they could cut a bass player out of the band.
You can play organ and a little bass, yeah.
And so they stayed in production. The problems they had originally was that these tops used to come from a boat manufacturer, and he only provided the tops with whatever they had available. And so sometimes you'd see the sparkle tops, the purple, the reds, all the different colors. It came from a boat supplier that actually made fiberglass shells and kind of stuff like that. So whatever he made, that's what they got, and that's kind of what they made their the tops out of. But around 65 or 66, a lot of things happened because CBS bought Fender. And when CBS owned Fender, that's when the 73-note Fender Rhodes piano debuted with a Fender amp underneath it that was originally two 40-watt amps, and each of them had two 12-inch speakers.
Did they face opposite too?
One would face the top right and the low left, and on the opposite side it was the other way around, if I remember right.
Okay.
But you had two speakers that faced out and two speakers that faced in. And the two left speakers, whether they faced forward or back, were, I think they were an opposite. So you had a stereo pair facing forward and the opposite stereo pair facing backwards. So when you turned the tremolo on, it went between speaker and speaker, both in the back and in the front. So there was kind of like a left and a right on both the front and the back. That way the person playing and anyone behind could hear just as well as the people that were in front. And it was actually a really good amp. The difference being is that the Suitcase model although it worked like an electric guitar, it had to have power going into it because it had a preamp in it. And preamp in a Fender Rhodes is something that this model, these Mark I stage pianos, did not come out until around 1970 or 71. Up until then, every Fender Rhodes was a Suitcase or a keyboard bass.
So yeah, so it had the whole amplifier underneath it.
It had the whole amplifier beneath it, and that's what you see on the Get Back sessions. And so when this came along, there was no preamp, and everyone thought it was strange that there's an electric piano that you don't plug in, but you don't plug in an electric guitar either.
Yeah.
It's the output is plugged in. There's no power to the thing. It doesn't have electricity in it.
Yeah.
It makes electrical connections that get amplified. Now the Suitcase piano had its own amplifier, and so because of that, it had to have a preamp. But you plug this straight in with a guitar cord and an instrument cable into an amp. Fender recommended a twin reverb, when it, or deluxe twin or twin reverb, to play these through.
And it sounds almost like nothing else, like that. And so
there's a lot of instruments that are similar and close, but a Fender Rhodes is, especially the Suitcase model.
Yeah.
And the way they used to record them was with microphones.
And they would mic it up in the front and the back.
A left and a right, yeah. Usually the left would go down here and the right would be up front.
So let's take a listen, because I think it's important to hear the magic of the Fender Rhodes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about, you know, how it was used and kind of where it is today, because you see it in your digital piano. You see, oh, the electric piano is the whole category, but isn't this whole thing an electric piano?
Well, the other thing too to remember is that in any digital instrument, any digital piano, if it's like $100 on up, or even when you go to electric piano number 1, the sound they're looking for is this sound. And that is usually the first number 1 electric piano on almost every digital keyboard.
Yeah.
And there's a whole story about Chick Corea's Fender Rhodes piano and how it ended up
as the recorded one. It's really fascinating. Chick Corea's Fender Rhodes piano deserves probably a series of videos. They're already out there, they're professionally made, and it is phenomenal to see how far that instrument has been heard. I think it is the most heard Fender Rhodes in the world because it was sampled and put into some of the basses of Yamaha and probably other keyboard manufacturers as the bass tone. So let's take a listen, we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this beautiful Fender Rhodes.
It's one of my favorite instruments in the world to play. I owned one when I was 15 years old. It was a Suitcase, and I could never play one of these enough.
It's incredible. The action is very different too. Like just sitting there playing it, it's because we played the CP70 recently. I have a Wurlitzer at my house, Wurlitzer 200. So the electric piano feels between each manufacturer is so different, just like the sounds are so different.
Now, have you looked inside one of these before to see how the tone is actually generated?
I was going to say, I think we should take a look underneath the hood and kind of talk about how this one creates its sound and what makes it, different than some of the other ones.
A real simple explanation, and the one that you used to get off of some of the advertising was that they said, quote unquote, tuning forks. And after a while, people got a little more educated. They used that word tine, T-I-N-E, tines. And actually what it is it's a brass bar on top, which would be like half of a tuning fork, and the other part is the tine. It's a smaller, thinner reed that actually bolts in to the bottom, so that when it gets hit, both parts vibrate like a tuning fork. And so they're built tuning forks all the way from down low to up high. And in front of each one, they have basically a guitar pickup that goes almost to like a shaved down pencil point front, and it sits right in front of where that tine moves, where the electrical field is at. And so it is electromechanical vibration, just like a guitar, vibrating string, vibrating tuning fork essentially, or a big piece of metal. And that makes the tone, you amplify it, you got bass, treble, mids, effects, all that kind of stuff you can do to it. That's the tone generator.
And then to tuning it, you basically adjust the
tuning is a tricky prospect because you have to open up the harp, and it's already going to be in tune. But if a lot of times these tines break, like after about a year or so, if you're playing on real hard on a song, especially these broke tines, I'd say probably a few a year, mostly because, and I always credited this to live performance. Performers always play and hit harder live.
You're moving it, picking it up.
You're moving it, and so like the wear and tear is rougher on the instrument, but it's particularly the playing that's rougher on it. And when they break, you have to replace them. They were never expensive back then. They were always affordable, but you had to learn how to tune the thing, and you just kind of slide that little, there's a little spring that determines where the field stops the vibration at. And if you go forward, it goes flat. You bring it back, it goes sharp. But there's a sweet spot in there, and you tune it with the harmonics.
Yeah, so incredible instrument. This one in particular is 1973, which I think is special. We were listing off albums from '73, and it's
best years for the singer-songwriter in the world.
And I was, when you list off, so like Dark Side of the Moon came out, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Inner Visions came out. There's just a plethora of incredible music that really changed how people listen to music, how they can see. Herbie Hancock's Headhunters came out in 1973. And so it's special to be here with this instrument.
There is no single guitar that can claim the amount of time that it has spent on the American Top 40. A Fender Rhodes piano has been on the American Top 40. I think there was a 21.5-year run where at least one song on the top 40, if not most of them in the top 20, featured a Fender Rhodes.
Just an incredible, rich sounding instrument that's a lot of fun to play. And we will be comparing it to the CP70. We'll also be bringing in a Wurlitzer here, Wurlitzer 200A, getting those all in the same room, kind of opening up our ears to the differences in electric pianos, and hopefully, raising awareness of which ones have the different tonal qualities and how they are different. They all kind of bring something particular and new to it.
I have a theory about the Fender Rhodes. So even though it was initially the really first trustworthy, reliable type of portable piano you could take on the road with a band and concert arena, recording studio, all that kind of stuff, my theory is that once the Rhodes was kind of an accepted thing, when you got to jazz, it opened up that concept of two keyboard players in a band. Before that, you never really had two keyboard players. But if you had a guy that was on Fender Rhodes and a guy that was on acoustic piano,
it really blends well.
It really blends well. And then synthesizers, there isn't one guy out there that just shows up and plays synthesizer. That was just an added feature for piano players and electric piano players. But the Fender Rhodes with the piano opened up the duplicity of keyboard sounds.
And it really allowed performers to cut through the mix a little bit more.
It did.
And to be, like we said, guitar players often get the shining, the spotlight, if you will, because they stand up front and they do their solo or whatever.
Right.
But it's because guitar can really crunch up and cut through. But electric piano really fits well in that same frequency spectrum, and really can carry a full melody because you're carrying different harmonies throughout the melody, and you get players just seeing Billy Preston do that in
Right.
Get Back. He adds so much layers to
color.
So much color to the
foundation,
and it's incredible because they really just.
Now, I wanted to mention this, is that one of the reasons why I went out and bought a Fender Rhodes when I was 15 years old was primarily Herbie Hancock. He was the initial salesman. And there was a record that he demonstrated you could tear out of like Downbeat magazine or Billboard, and it was one of those plastic records you put on your turntable, and it's available now on YouTube. You can go listen to it. And the exciting thing for Herbie Hancock on that is, as he's demonstrating this piano, I thought it was great because I knew all the things you could do with it. But what it did is it opened up the world of effects to piano players.
Oh, yeah.
Before that, you couldn't phase, you couldn't chorus, you couldn't echo, you couldn't delay, you couldn't fuzz, you couldn't do anything.
And that was right when
piano.
When guitarists were really starting to incorporate all those tricks and tools.
Yeah, so by the time you get to the mid-'80s, almost everyone that's using a Rhodes has a stereo chorus and a phase shifter going on. You just think of Dennis DeYoung from Styx, or even a wah for solos, and there was a lot of different sounds. And then the Rhodes preamp began to change with third-party interactions, and that's really what boosted a lot of the presence of Rhodes in the jazz world, was the clarity of the Dynamo piano, which was a separate pickup system. George Duke was one of the first guys I knew that had one, and George Duke had all these guys had phenomenal instruments. And I mean, Steely Dan, Donald Fagen calls his Lucy. There's a couple other guys that had names for their Fender Rhodes, just like they named their guitars.
Yeah, I mean, and where they live today, it's like you said, they're sometimes maintenance nightmares and so that's why a lot of bands and performers have switched to electric keyboards or digital keyboards that have electric piano sounds on them. But
you're missing the main important thing, though. All right, remember, I didn't bring this in by myself. This is 130 pounds.
Yeah.
Now you show me what gear people are using today. That's 130 pounds.
I know, and we've talked about the Kawai MP11 as being one of the heaviest, 80-something pounds, but you still got 50 more pounds to go.
Right.
But it is interesting because there is a little bit of a resurgence with vintage gear. First struck in the guitar market, and vintage guitars started just like the curve is just like spiking, and then it's almost like what are people going to spend on these 1970s Stratocasters and 1960s Les Pauls?
Joe Bonamesa's up there every night showing off a really cool inventory of amps and guitars.
And then it kind of I feel like it passed over pianos, of course, because pianos, everyone has an old Spinet or something in their house. So it's really hard to differentiate what's worth anything. Oh, vintage Steinway, but then it hit vintage synthesizers. That's making a big comeback. People are starting to spend money on vintage gear. And electric pianos are right there. And so where you could buy a Wurlitzer for $500 to $800 a couple years ago, or buy a Fender Rhodes for $800 to $1,000 a couple years ago.
That's not happening anymore.
Multiply it by 4 now. And because of the availability and because they're hard to find in working condition, and they're even harder to tech because a lot of people don't know how they function, that price is going to continue to grow. And so just there's Rhodes has a new company, and they're building new ones that you can put your name on a waiting list in $12,000, I think.
Something like that. You have to prepay, and you get your piano in about 22 months. I think.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just people recognize that this is a unique sounding instrument. It's really a cool piece of history, and so we want to tell everyone to run out and get one because they're hard to find.
Well, the other thing too is what I wanted to say is that the years of profitability for the Rhodes piano was probably from the early 60s with the bass model, all the way up through, I'm going to say, till around the early 80s.
Yeah.
By that time, people were throwing a lot of effects on them. They were inventing their own preamps, and they were doing different things with the instruments. You started to see a lot of the 54-key units show up with like a lot of the keyboard and pop bands through the 80s. But with the invention and the merging of either through ARP and then again with Roland, the Rhodes product, there was one Rhodes product that Harold Rhodes never had inside his house.
It's the Roland.
And that was the Roland Rhodes. That was a pure digital instrument that had his name on it, and that's not what he invented at all. It had the sound in it,
Yeah.
the sampled sound in it, but it was not that.
So yeah, we've reached the point of a sound reproducer and an actual sound creating machine,
Right.
The Rhodes holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts. If you've owned one, or if you have a story about Fender Rhodes, please leave one in the comments. We'd love to hear it, and I know a lot of people would love to hear it as well. We thank you guys for watching. Make sure you're subscribed so you can see when we compare this bad boy to a Wurlitzer, when we compare it to the CP70. Those are going to be a lot of fun videos, and we'll continue to bring in electric pianos and kind of look under the hood and play them and talk about them. So thank you guys for watching. Ted Barsalou, I'm Patrick Marr.